So recently, Helldivers did a very small patch with just a few fixes and changes to the game, but one of those changes has actually had the community split, and that was the change to capture the flag, now spawning less enemies. And in general, I found a lot of missions on the bug side at least, flat out not spawning enough enemies. And this isn't with this most recent patch, this has been going on the last few patches. There are some inconsistencies when it comes to super Helldive difficulty. Some games have tons of enemies and feel chaotic and fun, while other games just not so much. But even on some of the games with more enemy spawns where I've hit some of my kill records for the patch, it still doesn't even feel like as much enemies on older patches of the game. So we've got quite a few things to cover with the enemy spawns this patch, and after we go over this, I'll be needing to hear from you guys in the comment section to see what you guys think, because I really want to lay out everything about the game's difficulty that the community has been talking about, and then I'll give you guys my 2 cents, and then I'd love to hear from you in the comments. So before we get into the topic of today, let's shout out our continued video sponsor, Instant Gaming, the awesome website who offer popular video games for much cheaper prices. And they have the popular video games that are trending right now, but they've also got old classics, so just click my link in the description and search for whatever game you're looking for. You can get them for up to 80 or even 90% off sometimes. I personally use this website ever since they've reached out to me to grab any games I'm interested in. This is where I got my copy of Space Marine 2 from. But I also use this website for gift cards whenever we do War Bond giveaways. I got a $10 PlayStation gift card to give to someone on the channel who won, who was playing on PlayStation. And I've also grabbed Steam gift cards on here as well. And all just to save a few bucks. So check out Instant Gaming for any game you're looking for by clicking my link in the description and use my link to help me earn commission anytime you buy a game or gift card that you wanted. All right, so the first thing on today's agenda has to do with the amount of spawns on Capture the Flag mission. And this was dubbed the most difficult mission in the game because you actually had to hold ground against the endless wave of automatons assaulting the Helldivers just trying to spread democracy by raising a flag. Now, not only was this insanely fun and difficult because, it wasn't just an average kill order, but it was also hilarious because this mission in particular had way more spawns than any normal mission, such as launching an ICBM, and players not only found this really challenging, but just also funny, and it kind of felt like it fit the meme-like lore of Helldivers. The automatons are so hateful towards liberty that they send their strongest troops just to stop us from raising a flag to Super Earth. Now, pretty much everyone agreed that this was the hardest mission, but where the players sort of split was on whether the mission was too hard and should have been nerfed or toned back, or that it was too hard, but that was a good thing and the challenge was rewarding. For example, this Reddit post here says, "I liked the way the flag raising sucks. As it is right now, it's basically another trivial enemy killing objective that can be done without any coordination. And while it's important to keep the game accessible to casual players, I think it would also be cool difficulty where you have to cooperate to succeed. Because for those who remember the Diff 10 bot flag missions, same goes for Meridia extractions, the weeks after escalation of democracy and the old evacuate missions, remember what an amazing feeling it is to actually beat those things by cooperation." Someone else on Reddit commented, "Flags went from the most boring to the hardest shit ever created," with a comment underneath that one saying, "Yeah, but you feel extra patriotic raising that flag fighting off the waves of enemies. 07. And be sure to comment 07 down below when you're giving your thoughts on these missions." Another person then commenting, "And I'm here for it. Love having zoning/defensive stratagems for these missions, gas strike, Gatlin barrage, turrets, HMG emplacement, etc." And then another Reddit commenter saying, "On bug planets, it's a fair challenge if you plan your loadouts accordingly. But with the bots, it's absolute hell and super frustrating on Diff 10. And I just picked out these comments randomly. There's tons more of comments like this on both sides of the aisle. Some players saying it was too hard and frustrating, but others saying it was hard, but they enjoyed the challenge and they felt accomplished afterwards. Now, I'll just be frank with you guys. In my opinion, I am on the side of the aisle that I enjoyed the challenge because it did feel rewarding afterward. This was one of the few missions that we would get down to our last reinforcements and then a lot of the time, the last person alive had to retreat, and we would go at it again until we beat it. Now, another reason that I feel this way is because, let's just throw in some context here, 3 months ago, I spent about 9.5 hours on stream writing some feedback on the balance of Helldivers, back before they buffed every weapon in the game. And in this document, I wrote that it basically seemed like the devs were trying to make things difficult by making the guns basically feel bad and not meet breakpoints, especially for support weapons like anti-tank launchers and all the primary weapons. And obviously, luckily for us, Arrowhead responded to this feedback with the 63-day plan, and literally everything in the game was buffed since then. However, what got talked about a lot was the buffs I proposed, but what I literally wrote on the second page of this document was that the difficulty in the game should come from more engaging missions rather than frustrating enemies, and I didn't delve too deep into this because it was slightly off topic of, what I was suggesting at the time. But if we all remember, the old Helldivers used to be able to be beaten by simply running away, and the specific objectives and missions themselves weren't that hard. You kind of just had to kite a lot, throw some airstrikes until you could circle around back to them. And after the 63-day planned Buff Divers patches, that's obviously all changed. It's a lot more fun to hold our ground and fight hard instead of running away. So at this point, when one of the hardest missions in the game gets its spawns nerfed, I am definitely on the side that the harder difficulties should be amped up in spawns even further. And the other thing is that when we would ask for weapon buffs, a lot of the time some people would tell us skill issue, lower the difficulty. But it's like I said, we never really felt the game was hard because we could cheese it by running in circles. We just felt that the weapons were lackluster to use. And now that everything's gotten buffed, the weapons feel great and good to use. However, the spawns feel lower than they used to on previous patches of the game. So I am 100% on the side that the spawns should be amped up. The harder difficulties should be difficult, and if you find them challenging, you should think about lowering the difficulty. Now, just as a quick side note, there's a small conversation to be had about which difficulties should be the hardest. In my opinion, it should be 8, 9, and 10, where you have 6 and 7 where you can get super samples, but they're sort of more fun and chill with few heavy enemies spawning. Maybe you could try out different weapons and builds on these difficulties, and then take those builds into 8, 9, and 10, where you can get that challenge. And some people might say, no, just make 9 and 10 the hardest. Some people might say, oh, make 7 really challenging as well. But in general, for what it's worth, from my perspective, if you only made level 10 had the most enemies spawning, I wouldn't have a problem with that either, because ultimately I'm just gonna queue into the hardest difficulty no matter what. All right, but that's gonna lead us into the next thing we need to talk about, and that is the bug missions are just flat out not as many bugs as there used to be on some of the older patches. It's not just capture the flag getting toned back, it's all the missions, and especially rocket defense missions. So first, let's talk about rocket defense. The current bug rocket defense is a shadow of its former self. The spawns on the mission are flat out pitiful. Here's just a random screenshot of a rocket defense mission we did the other night. Now, I've done these missions numerous times this patch. There was just a bug defense major order. However, halfway through this major order, I actually started avoiding the operations with the rocket defense because I just find them flat out boring. And you can see we got a total of 532 kills over the course of about a 12-minute mission. And I've also noticed in a lot of the missions nowadays, there's like 1 to 3 Bile Titans in the entire time you're there. Maybe 2 Impalers, maybe like 10 or 12 Chargers. And the bug breaches are just very, very small in general. Now, in the background, I'm gonna play some footage from an old tips and tricks video. I was talking about how to 2-shot Bile Titans with the recoilless. How far have we come? Because now it one-shots them. But you can see back when our recoilless was 2-shotting Bile Titans, in this tips and tricks video, I got about 4 Bile Titan spawns in a matter of a minute's worth of footage. And again, I did, cut out some parts and edit this together. I would say this was probably a total of 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes. And from my own personal experience, I remember having to shoot down like 15 Bile Titans throughout the course of this mission, and they wouldn't even spawn at first. The Bile Titan spawns would be weighted towards the end, so you would oftentimes run into multiple in a row, and it would get insane. But nowadays, it feels like we're lucky to just see 2 or 3 of them in the entire mission. So not only does capture the flag need ramped up, but so does rocket defense. Here's a post of someone saying it's flat out boring, and they agree with me as well. The amount of spawns on difficulty 10, I think from anyone's perspective, can just say that it is not enough. And I don't even think people will disagree with me on this one. Again, I need all your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. Furthermore, the total amount of bug spawns in squads this patch on any given mission, you know, whether it's ICPM, Geological Survey, the SSSD, or Pump Fuel, just any normal mission, is far less than what they used to be. For example, here's a squads game where I've got the most kills on bugs I've seen in weeks. Probably the last 2 patches at least. It was over 800 kills. And for all intents and purposes, I don't keep track of like my kill records. However, I definitely look at my stats at the end of the game, and I know for a fact I do not often get 800 kills. And we could see that this is about 2,500 kills for the whole squad. 2 of my teammates had over 600 kills, and in my opinion, when I played this game, it was crazier than, you know, maybe the last 2 patches. Although at the same time, it still felt pretty chill compared to what we have played months and months ago before any of the buff diving happened. Now, for what it's worth, I'm just gonna compare this to fellow YouTuber Claysthetics kill record that he posted back in June of 4,200 kills for his whole squad. Now, this is a bit anecdotal, but from what I have paid attention on my own stat screens at the end of missions, my average, like, higher kill games are probably around 500 or 600 total, and I do always bring plenty of mobbing stratagems to kill as many bugs as possible. And the one I screenshotted in particular had 800 kills, which I've only gotten one other time this patch, and I went back to the game where I got the 800 kills the other time, and we had even less kills than the screenshot I'm showing you right now. And from my own memory, on previous patches, like back in June when Claysthetics was getting his kill record, I feel like I always had 500 kills on the low end, whereas that seems to be the average right now. And it just feels like the total amount of bugs in Terminid missions are just far, far less than what they used to be. So whether this was intentional by the developers to lower the difficulty alongside buffing our weapons, or maybe they have a problem differentiating the difficulties, like maybe they wanted to lower the spawns on lower difficulties, but it just ended up lowering the spawns on the higher difficulties. Or if there is some sort of new engine limitation going on, I honestly just wanted to leave feedback that I think the hardest difficulty should have more enemies in it. And previous patches did have more enemies in it, so I don't think it's an engine limitation issue, but I could definitely be wrong on that. There were 100% previous patches where tons of more enemies actually did spawn in on all of the missions across the board, whether it was capture the flag, rocket defense, or even just any old normal mission. And one last thing I'd like to talk about is that back before the buff divers patches, when the nerf divers patches were happening, we would ask for weapon buffs and people would tell us skill issue, lower the difficulty. And skill issue kind of became a divisive phrase thrown around in the community when in reality it's supposed to kind of just be used as a joke. There really shouldn't be anything wrong with lowering the difficulty if you're just trying to have a more fun and chill experience. There definitely should be a difficulty, you know, the hardest or the top 2 difficulties, wherever you want to draw that line, where you actually want the challenge and you actually want to sweat and you actually want to test your limits. Like if you make a mistake, you'll get swarmed and you'll die. A lot of us want endless hordes thrown our way in a horde shooter, and I know it can't be completely endless because there is gonna be an engine limitation at some point. It's just like I said, there's definitely far less bugs across an average mission now compared to what an average mission used to be. And we can show that with kill records, but it also definitely feels that way. Now, all in all, the game is very, very fun again. Pilestat did mention, I would have to dig up a screenshot, before the buff divers patches when he was teasing them, that he did think these next few patches would be a bit easier. They just wanted to nail the balance before they tuned things up on the hardest difficulties for those that did want a challenge. And the game is 1,000% fun again. That's definitely shown off in the player charts. I just wanted to leave feedback that I'm ready for the hardest difficulties to be tuned up. Crank it up, crank up those spawns, even add some really cool modifiers, like I'm still waiting for stalkers and bug breaches, or even, you know, Meridia-style Shrieker extractions. That would be ridiculous, and it would be annoying, but it would create those high-tense cinematic situations. Or even when a breach gets called, maybe spawn a breach in front of us and behind us and one to the side. Have the bugs come from all over so that I can't just cheese an entire bug breach with stratagems. And maybe, those are just suggestions, maybe don't necessarily do them. But for what it's worth, I think the most important thing is to make sure to add the more difficult modifiers only to whatever the devs select that the hardest difficulties should be. Definitely make sure that the line is drawn somewhere, whether 7 and below is like the more chill difficulties, and then only 8, 9, and 10 are the harder ones, or only 9 and 10 for that matter. I think the people who really are looking for the most challenge in this game is a minority of the community. I think, you know, we should be able to admit that, because I would imagine that level 7 is the more popular difficulty than level 10. And so I think that whatever the most popular difficulty is should stay as accessible as possible. I think that distinction definitely needs to be done, and it needs to be on a difficulty where super samples are available. That way those players can have progression and unlock everything that the game has to offer so far. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What side of the aisle are you on? Do you think the game should be harder on the highest difficulties, or are you happy and comfortable with where they've lowered the spawns to? And another question I'd like to propose is, if they did really crank up the spawns on the higher difficulties, if you were uncomfortable, would you be willing to lower the difficulty to something like 7 or 8 so you could still be challenged at your own level but still have a fun time? At the end of the day, I do think Helldivers should focus on fun, but I even wrote in my balance doc that there were other better ways to make the game more challenging than to make the guns feel bad. And I was always an advocate for buffs, and I've also always been an advocate for stalkers in bug breaches, only on the hardest difficulty. So I do want to know your guys' thoughts, because I always get feedback from you guys as well, and we'll probably go over some comments in the next video. So until then, I'll see you guys next time. I'm out.